Thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Wayne Morgan. I'm Director and Vice President of CHO. I'm also the CHO Membership Committee. So if your Municipal Heritage Committee has not renewed their membership or they have not joined, please do so. Come and see me afterwards. I'll be happy to fill you in on that. Now we're talking about the Heritage Wars and the battles won, and we have three presenters this afternoon. One from a local municipal heritage committee, another a professional in the field, and a third an educator in the field. And the first speaker is going to be Jack Wilford from the Midland Municipal Heritage Committee. And I've just met Jack, and I've found him to be a very quiet but effective individual who manages to organize all the volunteers for this conference. And like many people engaged in heritage, he comes from a different background, but he has a passion for it. He's a nuclear engineer. So that's really something to bring to, if you're going to preserve a nuclear power plant, here's the man. But anyhow, I'll bring him up and he can talk about the experience in Midland. Jack.
Okay, let's talk nuclear, folks. That's no. We're up and running here. Welcome to this afternoon's and final sessions. Just a brief word on behalf of the organizing committee. We're thrilled with the turnout and the enthusiasm that you've all shown for the sessions and the tours and things that we've been able to offer. So it's been a great pleasure for us to see what we think is a success. So, who has here experienced a long-term passion for an individual heritage project, whether it be at a property? Who would be in that category? There is probably the majority of the people in this room. Of those, whose project would be a non-building project? Many, very few, quite a small number of the total. That happens to be the category that I'm in. The other thing I wanted to just sort of mention as a preamble to my talk was basically last-minute thoughts from the dinner last night and from Susan Radcliffe's earlier discussion at the dinner, where Susan talked about one person, one building, one town making a difference. And that's, I think, what we largely experience in heritage, that somebody has an idea and becomes passionate about it, is able to convince others of the value of the idea, and before long engages the community. David Crombie in his talk also alluded to the how heritage and change can be complementary, and I think the example that I've got here today can be a good case study of how that can take place. I'll start off, I guess, with kind of a personal perspective on the thing. It really is the efforts of a committee, a very dedicated committee, and an extremely supportive staff in our planning department here in the town of Midland and the council that make these things happen. But I guess my own involvement with it was well before being aware of those committees and the structures. because maybe it's my engineering background, but I found myself driving by a road to what was at one time our family cottage, driving by this magnificent example of dry stone masonry. Skills that were brought over from Europe, and which are fairly common over there. And my partner Barb and I had a wonderful visit to New Zealand a few years ago, and we saw lots of examples of dry stone construction there as well. But this really intrigued me, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about it. This particular example, this is taken on one of the returns or sidewalls that run from the main frontal wall back into the property. Demonstrates the very accurate construction, very straight lines. The wall itself is well over 100 years old and has largely been neglected. So it's no great surprise that many of the top stones, capstones, have disappeared over the time. But the basic structure of the wall is still there and to be admired. It runs for 1,000 feet, and the original construction, I'm sure, maintained the same quality that we see in this small example here. This is a part of the sidewall, and looking at the face of the wall, you can see the accuracy. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. And working with stone in 110 years ago, with limited power equipment and facilities of that kind, one has to admire the ability of those masons to create such an edifice. The stones fit nicely together, and the illustration on the right side shows some of the elements of the way these rocks or these walls are constructed in order to last for basically a lifetime or many lifetimes. The base has to be a bit wider as you narrow up towards the top. This allows you to take advantage of gravity in order to hold the rocks in position. They're nested against one another. The interstices or spaces between the rocks are filled with smaller rocks, whatever, in order to maintain that support. Partway up the wall, on some of the higher walls, there are through stones that again tie the front and back elements of the walls together. And the capstones are generally the climax or the fitting topping to these structures. This is, apologize, it's my engineering interest, I guess, that I need to know how these things work. As a matter of fact, shortly after I kind of got interested in this subject, I had an opportunity to participate in the building of a wall under the guidance of a landscape gardener that is an expert at wall construction. And I did this with my son. And somehow or other, a lot of my friends got the idea of giving me the nickname of Dry Stone Jack. So, or Stonewall Jack. And so I'll show this slide later on, but there in the picture of the group after the wall was constructed was Dry Stone, or Stonewall Jack and Stonewall Jack's son. This is the main entry to the estate, which is the estate itself has been vacant for quite a number of years now. It has suffered from a lot of overgrowth. And you can see that there's parts of the wall that are very difficult to see. However, those who are going over to the Discovery Harbor this afternoon on the tour of Discovery Harbor and or the dinner later on will go by the stone wall, and there's been a mysterious group of people that have been out there trying to clean off the brush, and I'm not quite sure who they are, but they're probably in a little bit of trouble because it's private property. So. The estate was given the name Georgian Lodge, and the names are still visible on the capstones of the entry gates. Still maintaining their commanding presence, protecting, guarding this enormous estate that was at one time quite famous. Even the pedestrian gate is in very good shape. Now, when I refer to dry stone construction, you can see that some of these pillars are obviously not dry stone construction; they're mortared in place. But that's just at the sort of entry points. The rest of it, as you'll see later on, probably on the trip over, is all natural stone. It's a very good question. We've been curious about that. I think it's tagging, and I suspect there's probably a local gang that decides that we can't. It's NP, and if anyone has any thoughts on that, we'd be grateful for an idea. But I became quite curious about the history. I mean, I'd satisfied my curiosity about the sort of features and the type of construction and kind of satisfied that part of my curiosity. But what was the history of this? What was behind it? What was behind those walls in the early days? And so I tried to delve into the history a little bit, and the first thing that I inquired was of the local heritage committee at that time. I was not involved with them. What has been done to recognize this wonderful property? And I was told that there really wasn't a whole lot of interest in the municipality, or particularly that there was an emphasis of development over heritage preservation at that time. And as a private citizen, I didn't really see how I could change that. So I kind of thought about it every time I went by, and then finally I decided to sit down and write a letter and put my feelings on paper and send it to the Heritage Committee and members of our local council. This was about 5 years ago, and just sort of telling them how much I admired it, how much I thought it would be of value to recognize it as a and preserve it as a site. At about the same time, Bonnie Rourke, who I think was presented in one of our sessions yesterday, lived as a young girl right beside the wall, and in her eloquent presentation or letter that she wrote, described how the family had such respect for the wall and were very careful to replace any rocks that were found out of position, and sort of appealed to the powers that be in the town. Couldn't we do something about preserving it? I think by that time, perhaps through my letter, perhaps through Bonnie's letter that she wrote, and a very receptive Heritage Committee who had the patience to listen to what I had to say at one of their meetings, they took it on as a project, and eventually were successful in passing it through the process and and realizing a designation for the wall. Tremendous achievement. The story of the estate goes back quite a number of years to the late 1800s, and it's quite an interesting story, and I hope you'll have the patience to bear with me on it. We go back to 1883. The main street of Midland looks a little different today. The population at that time was about 2,000, and the town had done fairly well with the lumber industry. It was a growing community. And it's a time when Canada was growing at a great rate with immigration, with the lumber business, shipping, railways were being built across the country. And so Midland was starting to feel the effects of that growth. At about that time, in 1889 actually, there were three brothers, the Drummond brothers, George, Thomas, and John, who started their business in Montreal importing steel. And in about 10 years' time, they were able to actually start producing steel in Canada. And by the end of the 1800s, they looked at a location in Ontario, and they settled on Midland. Midland had a fine sort of port that would allow ships to come in, a rail line that would allow products to be shipped out, and obviously a growing receptive community. The company they formed, or as it was known here in Midland, was the Canadian Iron and Furnace Company. In about 2 years after coming, which would have been about the year 1900, the plant was busy smelting and producing iron products right across the bay from the town, right down the main street. Sorry, we're going to have to go through the whole thing again. I've just gone back. This was a time when Canada was able to boast its own iron foundry, shipping ore from Canadian mines in Canadian ships in a company owned by Canadians. So it was another sort of step in Canada's development. This is a view a few years later than the 1883, when the plant was in full production. If you look across, straight down the main street, cars are a little bit more popular by that time. That's the location of the foundry. That location was ultimately taken over when the steel business kind of floundered and by a grain elevator. That became a major business here in town, industry in town, importing and distributing grain. And since that time, that business has fallen away to be replaced by tourism and boating, and a large marina is on that site. So progress occurred. This is a view of the plant in full production. This is a building that is still there after all those years. Everything else has disappeared. And it hasn't been recognized as a designated building. Perhaps we should look into that. But there are enough people of interest that are interested in it that it looks like it's going to be preserved. Much of the labor for the foundry was brought in from Italy because of their skills. And but boy, what a hardship those folks endured. Coming from a Mediterranean country to Canadian winters, can you imagine? But they persevered and were able to make help make this operation a success. And many of them stayed in the area, are still here today, running their own businesses. Beyond the foundry, on top of a hill, George Drummond had a home built for he and his family. He was the general manager of the plant. Not a very good picture, but there is the original estate. You can barely see the evidence of the start of a wall, but I don't think the dry stone wall we're talking about today is the same one. It came a few years later. A local historian, Rena Bell, in her 1978 book, A Peek into the Past 100 Years, described the style of the Drummond family. And I quote, "The Drummonds lived in a beautiful home built on the side of a hill overlooking the bay. They lived in stylish splendor as compared to the average lifestyle of the day. People recall the family sporting about like a page from Oklahoma in a Surrey with a fringe on top." Bonnie Rourke, in her write-ups about the family and the wall, alludes to a story of one of the sons, Kevin Drummond, who grew up in the area, went away to McGill and got his engineering degree, came back, worked in the foundry, and eventually 1914 came along and he joined the armed forces, was injured, received a military cross for gallantry, and later died in action. The wall is the last remaining feature to remind us of the Drummond estate and its connection with Midland's history. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to run through to near the end of the slides. In 1980, after a series of ownership, the building was inexplicably burned to the ground, and the foundation still exists on the property. The battle it sounded like it was a smooth operation, but it certainly wasn't without difficulties, because although the designation process went through its normal routine of assessment and qualification as a designated feature, the developer at the time objected, but there was an independent assessment made, the Shearer Report is called, which supported the town's claim as a proper ability to be designated heritage site. So eventually the developer withdrew his objection. He had made a site plan on the property and was agreeable to go back, redo the site plan in order to protect the wall and actually integrate the housing along with the wall, which to me is a fantastic outcome, because it ties in. This is where David referred to change. Here we've got a new development, but they're embracing an old feature. It will be part of their community. The committee was obviously thrilled with this success, and in this slide we have Mr. Wes Crown, who is the head of our planning and development department. Sue McKenzie, I'm sure you've met earlier, is chair of our Heritage Committee, and there seems to be a curmudgeon that was probably left over from the old estate. This is a tighter view of the wall, the confines of the wall, and it shows how the individual properties have been redesigned to fit within that. We still have a fight on our hands, though. We've won the battle, but not the war. And the fight is really with some planned road realignment that has the potential of removing almost 60% of that wall. So we're very strong in terms of our commitment to fighting and preserving this wall, but we have some struggles ahead to make sure we do that. So, sorry.
Is the wall? Excuse me. Could you hold your questions till the end, and the other speakers let the other speakers speak, and then we'll open it up to questions everybody can ask.
Just about there. Anyway, the problem with road realignment to us shouldn't present too much of a problem. I mean, roads can be realigned, right?
Thank you, Jack. Cultural heritage landscapes are a difficult nugget to get hold of, and I think many of us have experienced the challenges of dealing with that. Midland has provided an example here, and we've also seen something of the history of the community that we're now in. Again, thank you, Jack. Our next speaker is Michael Seaman, Director of Planning for the town of Grimsby. I'm told that he was hired because of and not despite his heritage experience, which is long and extensive. I've known Michael for over 16 years, and I know that he gives generously of his time to other communities. So he comes out and he speaks about his experience as a heritage planner, and he did it when I was in Newmarket, and he came and talked about the Heritage Conservation District in Unionville and Markham, where he was then working. He's also a frequent contributor to CHO News, and for all of you that are members of CHO, you'll see his articles. So thank you for your contributions to that. Again, CHO News is open to any of you who wish to contribute an article. We'd be glad to take it. Finally, Michael, until a couple of years ago, you could have referred to him as your governor, because he really was your governor, because he was with Canadian Heritage, or Heritage Canada, as a governor representing Ontario. Michael.
Thank you. There we go. That's what I should be doing today, because it's 200 years to the day that the British forces gathered at Grimsby, and the Americans were camped there on Lake Ontario, and we shot a few cannons, and the native peoples came, and the Americans left, and that was sort of their last time in sort of really threatening Canada. So, but I decided to come here, and I'm glad I did, and there are going to be some great videos of that, but I would encourage you to come to where I work, Grimsby, and see that. So this is about warriors of heritage, and I'm not quite a warrior yet. I don't know. Maybe one day they'll get me dressed up in that uniform. As you know, I'm from Grimsby, and I've been around a bit, and I don't apologise for that. And right now, but it's given me some great opportunities to see some amazing buildings and communities, and places to really get passionate about, and which has been really fulfilling in my career. But I'm going to talk to you about one building, and that's the Brampton Canadian Pacific Railway Station, which is probably the biggest battle and the biggest passion that I've been involved in my career. So it's located in Brampton, and which was once known as the flower town of Canada, and there were millions and millions of flowers that were shipped all over the British Empire in the 1800s and up to the 1960s and 70s, and it's where I came from, England, Northampton, England, as a kid in the 1970s, and wasn't exactly a historical town, but there was history. There was these great buildings like the Peel County Courthouse that around to inspire, and I guess that took me on the path to heritage conservation. That's me doing co-op work in Oakville back in 1990. And I joined the Heritage Advisory Committee of the Brampton Heritage Board, and even got to do a TV show. And yes, I do say TV adds £10, so there you go. But Brampton in the 1990s was a tough time to be on a Heritage Advisory Committee. There was rapid growth and change, as there still is, and somewhat declining downtown core. And those in charge seemed to think that the past was passé. It was holding us back, and any reference to Flowertown was being buried. And I took a bit of an exception to that, because I thought that was a really interesting and exciting part of our community's history. This was one of the first battles that I experienced in McKillop House, which was one of the estate managers of the Dale estate that was so dominant in Brampton's history. But it went, as did all these buildings here. And it was pretty, it was hard to accept, because at this time I'm also working at the town of Markham, where we're actually preserving buildings, and it was a bit challenging to accept that. But I think the most challenging of all was this building, the Brampton Canadian Pacific Railway Station. And this is it in probably between 1902 and 1912. It was actually built in 1902, and for a time, I suppose, it sent passengers all the way up to Owen Sound, where they would have got the Keewatin, and while it was running out of Owen Sound anyway. Really interesting building, Credit Valley stone base, and these huge, enormous brackets. And many flowers were sent from there all across the British Empire. When it was during one of the preservation efforts of the building, all these letters and stuff were found in the attic, and which is a really great story of what it's about. As I said, it sent people across the Canadian Pacific transportation system and sent people to war and back. And but like many stations in 1969, it lost its agent, and the writing was on the wall. And CP said, the service will continue. Well, a year later, the service just discontinued, and by the late 1970s, it had been abandoned for some time, and there were weeds growing, and they hadn't been painted. So the city decided to send a letter to CP and said, can you keep it up a bit? And CP sent back a letter saying, we'd like to demolish the station. And so it was threatened. But at the same time, the Brampton Heritage Board was founded, which was our LACAC at the time. And they decided to make it a cause, and the whole community rallied around saving the CP station. I think it was something that really resonated with people there. To the extent that CP were saying, we're a federally regulated agency, you can't tell us what to do, and the city took them to court, and unfortunately we lost. So going along, they said, well, we've got to find some way of doing it. And so they decided they were going to have to move it or lose it, and the provincial government, I believe it was the Ontario Heritage Trust, came forward with a grant to help it be moved off-site. And there it was, this incredible site, this massive train station being relocated through Brampton in 1982. And it moved to Huttonville, if you've ever been to Huttonville, and it was a nursery for a while, and this fellow, John Hutton, he's still on Brampton Council, and there it sat, and it was seen as a success. People say, the old train station, and well, of course, not everything is forever. And a couple of years later, it was bought by the Lionhead Golf Club, and so Mr. Hutton left, and it was at the back end of Lionhead, and they really had no use for it, and it started to decay. And so when I'm on the Heritage Board, I guess I found out about it when I was doing the TV show, because I was looking at locations to film, and I thought, wouldn't that be great to do a show there? And they said, you shouldn't go there, it's pretty depressing. And I went, and it was pretty depressing, seeing what condition it had been in. And they really didn't put it back together properly when they moved it either, so it didn't really help things. And so, we said, well, let's go and save the station again. And we started a campaign, and we're really lucky to have this woman here, Pam Douglas, for the Brampton Guardian, and she won't support Heritage blindly, but when Heritage makes common sense, she was right behind us the whole way. And she actually wrote articles on this station before I even came involved. And so we had that support of the local newspaper. And we had some early promise. We had a number of groups that came forward and said, yeah, we'd be interested in acquiring the building and doing something with it. And but the golf club wouldn't sell, they weren't interested, and everything kind of fell flat. But then we discovered there was a heritage easement on the property, and we thought, yeah, we've got it. And the reason being is because the province had given a grant to the station, and unfortunately they put the easement in the holding of the city rather than the province. So the city wasn't really upholding the easement and indicated that they really had no intention of doing so. I think the building had gone to so far that there was no interest in doing that, and the building continued to decline. And in the meantime, I'm going to Brampton Council and yelling and not yelling, but I'm making frequent presentations about, you've got to enforce the easement. And because I was the main heritage planner sort of in the group, and I think they got fed up of hearing from me. And that was one of the things that I was going to say as a message in terms of heritage, is that you have to know when to step aside and depersonalize it. And I did this with this fellow here, Paul Hunt, who was probably he was a septuagenarian. He kind of reminded me of like a 80-year-old Nick Nolte. Maybe that's as old as Nick Nolte is these days, I don't know. But it was clear that they would just shut down when they heard from me speaking. So I would write the speeches, and then Paul would say them in his clear and clever style. And we started to make some headway, but the station was still declining. And so the city came and said, Mike, it's going to come down. We're going to release a demolition permit. It's a safety hazard. And I said, okay, what about dismantling it? I didn't want to let it go. And I said, okay, sure. And the mayor said, I'll arrange with Kenneth and we'll get it dismantled. And I said, fine, great. And so we got a crew together and started dismantling, documenting the station for the future dismantling, and we rallied support again. But then we learned that the deal actually wasn't to dismantle; it was just to dismantle it with a front-end loader, and so that wasn't good. And so they said, on July 1st, 1998, we're going to knock down the station. Now, what happened on July 1st, 1988? Canada Day, yeah, it's a great day to knock down a symbol of Canada's heritage. And so the Globe and Mail picked it up, and people started listening again, and the real tipping point came when Paul just got so angry about this latest sort of setback that he went down to City Council with like a $500 check, and he slapped it down and said, I challenge anyone in the sound of my voice to contribute to this. And he's quite a really good speaker and really genuine fellow. And council said, you know what, we're going to pay for it, and they did. And so they did it properly, and there it is, bang, bang. The irony is once you got the roof off, the brick was not in that bad a shape, but there it is. So it was down. I said to Paul, Paul, we've got to get it back up again. And so we decided we'd found like a historical society. We looked at getting an ACO branch and that, but Brampton just wasn't ready yet for what is an architectural conservancy. People just didn't know. I felt like sometimes I was like the only person in the city that knew what it was. And so a historical society was kind of an easy thing to, it's my wife actually, an easy thing to grasp. And so even though it was a historical society, we kind of had a bit of an architectural focus with it. And so we went out on the street, and this is before we were married, and she still married me after I made it. And it was very inspiring. People coming up giving me $50, $100 to put the station back together, and we had over 100 followers, I think, within the first probably the first year of society, and people just really believed in this building and our purpose. Of course, the city dumped it in the middle of a field, Crawford's Pine Valley Farms, and Crawford had some washrooms and things like that from his camp that he had, and so we spent a couple of weeks putting it away inside a shed, and it was back away for safekeeping until we could figure out what to do with it. Well, shortly thereafter, you could really feel a heritage constituency being born, and we got wind that the city was considering knocking down the Heritage Theatre, which is the old Capitol Theatre of Woodville Theatre in the middle of the city. And, we packed the council chambers that night when they were considering that. And they decided to defer it, and it's still there. This was 13 years ago. And, but then shortly after that, everything's forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. there was a house that was supposed to be preserved in a new development in Brampton called the McClure House, a beautiful 5-bay building, and one day in the middle of the night it was stripped of everything. And it's a crazy story. Apparently they shipped it to Calgary. Like, I don't know what they did with it in Calgary. But it was really a shock, and this was really a gorgeous building. And so we got our delegation to council, and I just got a gut feeling. I said, you know what, we can't yell at them. That we've got to, you know, this is just, we're just going around and around and around. And so we came up with 10 points, you know, like get a demolition control bylaw, get a heritage inventory, do this, and, you know. And so we wrote the speech, Paul read it and said, you know, these are the 10 points that we recommend. And wouldn't you know it, within a month or two, the city staff called me up and said, I've been given a new task. It's to implement these 10 points. And so we started on the road to something, and really inspired a new culture of conservation. Now, I can't take credit for that, because I left Brampton and moved to Aurora after that, but people like Jim Leonard and Paul Willoughby, who are in the room, I hope, today, and Michael Avis, and all the people like Stav and Antoinetta, who continue the heritage staff, doing amazing work there, and we've really built a culture of conservation in Brampton. And even the Flower Town is back. You know, in the 1990s, Flower Town was passé, but it's back. Even to the city putting it on their logo. You know, and so last year they won the Ontario Heritage Trust Award for community heritage leadership. If I'd have told you that in 2000, you would have laughed at me, sure. You know what they did last year? Cost them several $1 million, of course, but there you go. It's amazing. You've got to go and see it. It's at Creditview Road in number 7. It's a focal point of the new Civic Square in the Mount Pleasant Village. And it's a community meeting room and space as part of a development complex, including a new public library and high school. Involved multiple partners, including federal government, the developer, which is ironically is Mattamy Homes, which was the developer of that house I was telling you about. Library, school board, and the city, and they all got together. And so this is like a combination high school, library, and meeting room. And it's next to the railway line too. So that beyond the square, there's a railway, so you can pass through the square and then catch a train. So you can hear the sound of trains from the station again, which is really, really cool. It's a community meeting space and in this neighborhood, and you know, it's a neighborhood that's a very multicultural neighborhood, and it's almost perfect really, because isn't like train stations are kind of like universal heritage. And wherever you go, if you go to Africa, India, China, they have trains and they have stations, and it really apparently is extremely popular, really resonates with the community. And what Brampton got was that heritage provides a sense of place and focus and identity in the midst of all this suburbia, and it helps make Brampton a better place. And I gave an award last year when I was governor, which is great. And we even got John Hutton back, the guy who was the nursery fellow. And so there you go.
Thank you, Michael. That's an inspiring story of how one building can lead to a culture of conservation through the whole community. I also liked your point about knowing when to back off and to let somebody else take the lead. That's something that we as heritage advocates often have a difficult time doing. Sometimes our council is tired of hearing us. Maybe we got to back away and somebody else has to step up to the plate. Anyhow, thanks again, Michael. Our next speaker is Dr. Robert Shipley. And I knew of him a long time ago when people started to ask, well, heritage preservation is going to depreciate the value of my property. And we said, go take a look at the Shipley report. He looked at designation, and what it does to heritage values, and you're wrong. And I thank him now. It's been a while since we've used that report. We still use it, but that was great. Now, last year I saw him in action at the Kingston conference, and I learned a couple of things about him. One thing is he's great with a cannon, and in fact he can blow the American ships out of the water. So if they decide to invade us again, we haul him out, get the cannon out, and he'll blow them back down to across the border. And if that doesn't work, he'll put his kilt on, and he'll get his bagpipes out, and that will really drive him across the border. Now on that, I'd like to call on him. Robert.
So I see my reputation as a loose cannon precedes me. Thanks very much. So this, oh boy, there's a lot of people. A lot of people came in after I did. As my able and optimistic colleagues have told us some really inspiring stories right now, and I'm certainly all in favor of that. I'm often, when I hear heritage people complain, I often say that old line that it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And so these stories of success are great. Having said that, when this family gets together, when it's, I think we need to tell those stories to people who aren't part of this clan or this tribe for sure. But when we get together, it is a time for some reflection. And so now I'm going to rain on the parade a little bit, if I may. The task that I've set for myself today is to be kind of grumpy and challenging and maybe scolding, and to make people a little bit uncomfortable. So I hope that's okay. I can do this kind of thing because I am now officially an elder. That happened a few months ago. I'm also a tenured university professor, which means, as I understand it, I can say whatever I want and they can't fire me. And the other thing is that, frankly, at this point, I really don't care whether people like me or not. Yeah. Yesterday we had this great talk about the War of 1812, which I somewhat disagree with, but that's for another discussion. But it put me in mind of the Battle of Lake Erie, and the American commander, Oliver Hazard Perry. Hazard, what kind of a name is Hazard? Anyway, Oliver Hazard Perry, and his famous line was that he sent in a dispatch after the battle: "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." Very famous. So years later, in the cartoon Pogo, and people who are my age or older will remember Pogo, but the Pogo says at one point, paraphrasing Perry, "We have met the enemy, and they are us." So what I want to talk about today is a little bit about how sometimes heritage advocates can be our own worst enemies. I'll talk about three things that kind of bother me and that I think we need to look at. One is we tend to exaggerate sometimes, and it's not useful. We tend to give in to envy, and that's not very useful. And what's worst of all, I think sometimes we don't understand the communities that we're working in very well, although I think Michael's given us quite a good example of how understanding the community in Brampton certainly did work. So let me just give some examples. One of the things I hear people say all the time is the OMB always sides with the developer against heritage. Well, certainly it happens, but it's not true that it always happens. And so one of the things we need to do is inform ourselves a little bit more about facts in things like in situations like that. And right now, with the University of Waterloo and the Heritage Resources Center, we're working with Marcus Letourneau, who was formerly the heritage planner in Kingston, who's done years of work on OMB decisions that relate to heritage. So we have about 100 of those cases on our website right now. You can search them, and we're adding more, and we're going to and we're beginning to analyze those to try to learn from what's happened in the past. Because what we need to do is not just despair at something like the OMB, but learn how to make our cases when they do come forward. Another phrase that I hear quite often is, we've lost everything. There's nothing left. And really, I mean, we have an enormous stock of stunning buildings and neighborhoods and streets and other kinds of structures in this province. I mean, we not just amazing places like North and South London, which are these amazing residential neighborhoods, but on my way driving up here yesterday, or whenever it was, yesterday, I guess, going through Fergus and Stayner and Elmvale, I mean, these wonderful towns with almost their entire main streets intact. I mean, we shouldn't say that we've lost things, and that's unfortunate, but we have an enormous stock of heritage resources to work on. The second thing I wanted to mention is this envy, this idea that somewhere else is better, somewhere else people care about heritage. It's always England. This is what I hear about. Oh, England. Well, I read a book, just recently finished a book, which was about English estates and great houses on the estates. So we're talking about these wonderful palace-like buildings, Downton Abbey things, that were built mainly in the 18th century. Well, it turns out that in the course of the 20th century, a third of all those buildings were lost in Britain. They were knocked down for motorways. They deteriorated from lack of maintenance. They were foreclosed on, and a lot of it apparently had to do with horses. Not the kind of horses that people were riding on those estates, but the kind of horses that lost races that the owners of those estates had bet all their money on. What I'm getting at is that, to think of other examples, most or many of the towns in Germany and many other towns in Europe were completely destroyed in the Second World War, which is one of the reasons why we have the kind of international movement through UNESCO and ICOMOS and World Heritage and so on, because of how much was lost in those, especially the Second World War. So what we see now when we go to many of those towns are repros. We've got our originals. They to their credit, they built them back the way they were, but they, in large way, are reproductions. So what I think is that other people have their treasures and other people have their challenges, and we have what we have, and we need to focus on that. It's nice to go to other countries and enjoy those things, but we shouldn't dwell on some kind of dream that things are better somewhere else. We have to fight our own fights here. What a place like the UK does have is about 3 million signed up members of the National Trust. So they've got a political constituency that's been built up that can be very much part of the political debate when it goes on. So why can't we get the Minister of Culture to come to a gathering like this? Well, frankly, it's because there's not enough of us. We don't represent any kind of political bloc that can have any electoral feeling. So those are two things. But finally, what I wanted to talk about is what I've seen all too often in many communities in the province, which is failed efforts to designate and to protect districts or properties, not because of reluctant councillors and not because of evil planning and engineering staffs or uncaring public, but quite often because of the intransigence of the heritage activists. And, well, but, my son comments, he says, when I tell stories, it seems like everybody else in the world is an idiot, and I'm the only one who knows what's going on. To which I say, well, what's your point? But seriously, that's how what I hear often from heritage activists is though they're the ones who know what's going on, and everybody else it is not right. So, for instance, and sometimes what I have to say is what I detect when I stand back and observe these situations is there's sometimes people who don't even have heritage as their primary interest. I see sometimes people who are making a political name for themselves because they're going to run for office or are running for office, and they want to be seen as a hero for something. So the more destruction there is of the architecture, the more prominent they become as a champion for this. And I'm thinking this is not the motivation that people should have who are working on these things. So, an example: a heritage conservation district that has been in a community that's been defined, in which there is and there are boundaries in which there's quite a bit of support, serious support among the residents for the designation. Heritage activists come in who don't live in this neighborhood, who want the boundaries extended, and they fight for this. And what they end up with is sections that are now have residents who are opposed to this because they want to extend boundaries that don't make very much sense, that people have a bad, they don't see why they should be part of this. And in the end, they end up with nothing. Not a limited district that can begin to have controls, but nothing at all because of fighting over it. And in a debate in another community over a conservation district, I heard someone say this line, which I'm going to tell you. And this is someone who I respect, who has great knowledge, who I like as a person. But the line was, compromise is not in our lexicon. Okay. So what I'm saying is I think that it's time for a lot of heritage activists to get a new dictionary with words in it like reasonable accommodation, respect for other people's legitimate opinions, flexibility, incremental change. Maybe these are things that belong in our fights, not absolutism. But I think what this shows most of all is a lack of understanding of community, because communities are diverse, and there's going to be people who don't share the opinions of the people in this room. And I think that those people have legitimate reasons for what they feel, and we should have room and respect for that. We should try to attract them to what we think is good planning and good conservation practice, but I don't think we should insult them. So, my mother always said, you catch more, or you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. Now, why my mother was trying to attract flies, I never... But anyway, it seemed like a pretty good phrase. Sweet is better than bitter or sour, is what I think I'm saying. So I have a couple of challenges for people. I think that ACO branches, when they're doing their advocacy, should set a sweet to sour ratio. So what I'm thinking of is, for every time that you need to go and complain about something or fight about something at council or other meetings, show up twice to say something good. When things do happen, when the engineers do reroute that road, go to council and praise them and say what a great thing they've done. And I don't see people doing that. I see people saying, those engineers, this time they did it, but we can never trust them the rest of the time. Well, of course not if you approach them like that. So I say the 2-to-1 ratio is something to shoot for. And the second thing is members. We need lots more people in this movement. And so what I'm asking people to do is next year, at next year's conference, bring 2 new people. So I think that I'm done with what I'm going to say, and I don't know whether anybody's going to have dinner with me tonight. Probably not.
Thank you, Robert. It's always great to be challenged and questioned and to learn. And I think we've talked about wins here, some of the wins that we've had, at least in the previous 2 speakers. But, you should also look at your losses and think about, why did you lose? How can you improve the situation? Okay, we're now going to move into questions. You have an opportunity to ask questions of each of the speakers.
Right.
Wall and the road who owns the road? Is it a provincial road, a township road, a district road? What's driving the relocation that would have to interfere with the wall?
I guess I'm on. The road is a municipal, the town of Midland owns the road. There are changes that are required according to the town engineering department, whom I respect, by the way. But there are lots of different ways of designing roads. I'm not a civil engineer, but I know that there are. And I think there's talk about compromise. There are compromises that can be made in the planned road realignments that could save our wall.
Good.
Okay.
I know in Oakville, Broadview Road was redirected around a tree.
There you go.
And quite successfully, and it's a wide road, so there may be some precedent there. Heritage tree committee could really be helpful.
I in Newmarket, the region, who many people love to hate, relocated a road so that it would avoid a feature of a canal to the Trent Severn system, a canal that never operated. So, I mean, they went out of their way. Gentleman in blue.
Thanks, Sir Michael, actually. I wonder if you could speak to the politics of what was going on surrounding the Brampton train station. I'll be referring to this later this evening, but one of St. Marie's great champions in his formative years was Bill Davis. Of course, he was premier in LA when the station was first being threatened. I wonder if he played any role at all in that debate.
Well, Neil Davis is Neil Davis is my family lawyer, and
He asked me to ask that.
yeah, my dad would see more than I would, but I got good encouragement that the Davises were behind it, so which was that's really all they could do, you know. But it was good to know you're on the right side, sort of thing. And,
Okay, any other questions? Yes, the far back there.
This is a question for Jack Wilford. We know each other quite well. Jack, in terms of having a supportive council or councillors on your heritage committee that are dedicated to preserving it, did that play any kind of a role in terms of the Drummond Hall?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it certainly did. We had Zena is she here? One of our counselors, Zena Pendlebury, was on our committee at the time, and prior to that, actually, our questioner was on our committee, and both of those individuals were very supportive and helped push that message through to council. So we appreciated that.
Okay.
Robert, I got a battle that became very difficult and ended up in tragedy. And I'm just interested in your perspective on this. When you run into a council who are willing, reluctantly, to go along for a period of time, and when you've got all the ducks in a row, you've got the heritage study done, and it says, yes, this is preservable and should be preserved and has all these merits, and you've got an engineer ready with a unique design to put bracing into the building that the council has requested, that's all ready to go. When you've got a grant structure lined up to fit once in this case, the ACO branch takes ownership of the building. And then the council has a panic attack and says at a meeting that, and the staff, by the way, the chief administrative officer and planners have all done a report that says, yes, the proposal that we have made is the one the council should follow. Council then says, well, we just don't believe in this anymore, we're going to cancel it. Then at the meeting, they make an agreement to at least save the major architectural features of the building. And then instead of doing what they say they're going to do, they bring a hi-ho in at 7 a.m. before anybody can do anything and totally crumble the building into a mess, saving one window and a ventilation unit. And I mean, I wrote an article for CHO News back when this happened because there has to be respect and some kind of contractual honor on both sides. And unfortunately, we run into councils where that doesn't happen either. Curious about I appreciate the strategic messages you're bringing. I just wonder about it.
And so we're talking about Owen Sound?
No, we're talking about Georgian Bluffs and the Mennonite Church.
How many Bolsheviks can you round up in that community? I think maybe you might need a whole-scale revolution. I've heard I have the privilege to travel around and talk to people in lots of different communities and hear those different experiences, and I've heard this story before too. And I think what happens there is you've been out lobbied behind the scenes, and like the people who want a different outcome have got to enough councillors to make that difference. And so I think the only advice, and this is easy for me to say because I do just travel around to different places. I don't have to actually fight these battles in community by community, but I have been involved in some of them. But I think that the relationship with elected officials is a long-term one, and it needs to be fostered. You need to go to lunch with the people, twice, 3 times a year or whatever, and build that up, and so that you've got that trust, so that you don't get what appears to be a majority at one point, and then it melts away. That's not particularly profound advice, but I think that's what it speaks to is building relationships of trust over a longer time, and keeping in mind that how many councillors?
7.
So you only need 4. You only need 4.
Yes, yeah, and we felt we had 5 for sure.
Yeah.
And they had given personal assurances. I think you're very astute in saying that there was some other lobbying going on behind the scenes. And so you just can't trust their word depending on the lobbying that's going on. Thank you.
Yes, Tom?
Is it appropriate for,
Is it appropriate for members, volunteer members of Heritage Committee, this is a follow-up question, to lobby counselors? You know, there is a relationship in the sense that you're a member of a committee that's been appointed by council, or you have been appointed by council, and you're there to advise council. But at the same time, is it appropriate to contact, more or less interview, gain an understanding, and share information one-on-one with councillors? And in particular, councillors that I would say perhaps you want to gain a better understanding of where they're coming from.
Could I just answer this, or start to answer? I've been a member of a heritage committee. I've also been the staff member that's had to deal with this sort of thing. And when you're appointed as a municipal heritage committee, you run a fine line between advocacy and being an advisory body to your council. And it's somewhere where there's a sweet point there that you've got to find with your council, and it's going to change with each council that comes along. Because some councillors don't want you lobbying. You are an advisory committee. Just give us your advice and we'll make our decision. Other councillors will accept the fact that you can come in and speak to them. But if you're an advisory committee and your council has made a decision, you cannot go out there and start advocating for a different position. You've just lost your credibility. That's important. And you want to add anything?
Do you have things that you could comment on from?
It's a very interesting point, and
it's really, I understand the point about lobbying after. That really isn't what I had in mind, but I accept that. But it's gaining an understanding or a point of view from someone else.
There's I think, a case to be made when the question was asked earlier about the support we had from councillors who are appointed to the committee, and where that does not occur, where you don't feel that you have that support, it seems to me that there's a case can be made to make direct approaches to other members of council. Otherwise, how do you get your story through?
Yeah, I think that if you broaden the question out, do you think that someone who's appointed to, say, a scientific committee, what do we call them? We have them advisory committees for environmental committee. Would those people who are experts who are on that committee go and talk to councillors about environmental issues? I think so. I think the problem comes when somebody who's on a committee and the decision of council will affect them getting a job or getting permission to make money. Then I think you're at the point where you shouldn't be. There's a limit on lobbying, if you want to call it that. But I think that these things, at the level we're talking about in our communities, it really falls in the category of relationship building. I think it's entirely legitimate for that to happen.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I've been on both sides as well as an advocate and as a planner. And in Brampton, we were failing when we were trying to advocate from the Heritage Board within the city, and it was just they had expectations, and rightly so, that we were their advisory committee, and but they also seemed to think we were the only 10 people in Brampton that were interested in heritage, and so things really only started happening once we went outside and we did that historical society, and we were able to lobby from outside, and those of us that were still inside had to keep quiet while the ones that were on the outside could say what really needed to be said. And we built up relationships with members of council, and that's how we found out about the theatre coming down in advance of everyone else knowing it. That's where it is.
Okay, David Steele has the microphone.
And this may seem to be a bit of a side question, but it arises to some extent from the real estate session this morning. We need whatever items we can to dispel myths. And Dr. Shipley, your report on the value of houses, the retail value of houses within the heritage conservation districts, is very often quoted as supporting the fact that heritage houses in fact have a value, that they hold that value, and maybe even increase their value compared to other houses. The question was raised, though, has any study been done about houses outside heritage districts and what the effects of designation is or has been in terms of property values on those kinds of houses?
Just to clarify, are you meaning properties designated under Part 4 as opposed to Part 5, the district designation?
Yes.
Okay.
Not the district designation, but individual houses that would be designated on our property.
Yeah, what we've produced in the Heritage Resources Centers is a series of reports and studies over going back to the early 1990s. And so maybe the oft quoted one, a work of mine, I think from about 2000, had to do with Part 4 designations. And subsequently, we've done research on districts, on Part 5 designations. So the same trend is true of individual designations and district designations.
Is that available on the website?
Yes, on the Heritage Resources Center website, University of Waterloo. If you Google Heritage Resources Center, it comes fairly close to the top. And all of those, there's many reports that are there, along with all the OMB decisions.
Next question, yes.
I'm really new at this. I'm from Grey Highlands, which is a new community. I'm from Grey Highlands, which is one of the newest communities in Ontario, and even was settled not until after 1850. But you're talking about relations to the council. What the approach I've been taking is twofold, and you talked, Dr. Shipley, about more flies for the honey. If you can find a win-win instead of making it adversarial, and so that there's something that the community that's outside of the people that are involved with heritage are also gaining from your efforts, that helps. And I really recommend you bring your deputy mayor to the Heritage Conference.
Okay, next question or comment? Right behind you.
The question usually came up had to do with whether or not you follow your counselor's advice. Your counselor only gets advice in various groups. If his decision may not be as popular among his constituents, I think even whether in the Heritage Committee or elsewhere, is that you really, you have to believe in the political system, that he's elected as a servant. You really have to believe, and you have to go and tap again on your constituent resources in order to prove him right or wrong. And that's our duty as electorate. And that's really important. That's what Robert was talking about, is bringing 2 more people next year. It's the same thing of getting people involved and believe that he's there to represent the common good. And if you don't believe, we're going the wrong routes. You really have to go the high road.
Okay, thank you. Just hand the microphone next. Yes.
I was just wondering, what are the qualifications that a person needs to be on a heritage advisory committee?
That's up to your municipality, and it's usually defined in the bylaw that establishes the municipality, that has been established by the municipality, and it's usually just if you're a resident of the municipality.
You can't be on the obituary page.
Thick-skinned? Is that
I just wanted to mention that I'm from Niagara Lake. On our municipal heritage advisory committee, there's only one person who has any background at all in heritage. Now, at one time, I understand that these people were sent away to take courses so that they could advise on heritage. They are not supposed to advocate, at least that's what I understand. They're just advisory only, but how can they advise on such very, very important issues if they have no background at all?
Yeah, if I could respond, as I was a member of a heritage committee starting back in 1980, I never was sent away. I went to courses that interested me, and the province did at that time offer training courses that we could go to if we so wished. The other thing is, it's entirely at your municipal council's discretion who they want to put on the advisory committee. That's their right. Now, they may have qualifications in the bylaw that establishes the committee, or they may just say you're a resident and you're alive and kicking. So it's their discretion. Yes, at the far back there.
Thank you. Just as I begin here, I'm Barry Nelson with Heritage Market Managing, serving for 5 years. As we look around the audience this afternoon, how many people actually do serve on heritage committees? All right, so like me, you got sent away. You may have requested that, and this is my 5th year, and it's taken a couple of years to sort of swing into this whole conference setting. You know, we're a bunch of detailed analytical people for the most part. And it's not that we're trying to be bad, it's just we break off into our plates and we reconnect. And there's new people here. I've got David Lee. How many people are new? You know, we've got to find these people and make them feel comfortable because it's an educational experience. I want to support what you were just saying. Our job is to interpret the plans that have been set down before us as lay people for the most part. But we also have architects serving on our committees. How many of those folks are in your? You know, they're lesser, but we seek their input. And so every committee is made up of a number of people who assess based on a number of different inputs. And then we advise. We don't even really decide. So I just wanted to, like, there's a lot of highly qualified people in this room simply because you've taken part in so many application discussions, and each one of them leads to a more educated outcome. That's all I want to say.
If I could comment on that, well, the process that I've seen most often in municipalities is that there's a call goes out in the local newspaper or something for volunteers for municipal advisory committees. And most people, you know, want to be on public works or something where they get to spend lots of money. And when those committees are filled, then the people who applied then get put on other committees. So that's one of the ways in which we have people appointed to heritage committees who don't have any particular background. But I think that I would go back to the case about building a constituency. I think that you know, what would be nice to see is where there's so many volunteers for the heritage committee, and there are people who have real expertise, that they'd be vying for those jobs. But a lot of times there just aren't very many volunteers. And sometimes people will serve on those committees for, there's probably a limit. They can serve 3 consecutive 2-year terms, something like that. And then you lose the people with that expertise that's built up, and they're gone. And there's not enough people to replace them because we don't have enough people in this constituency.
I mean, people are never banging down the door usually to be on the Heritage Committee. Usually we're really pulling at teeth to get the numbers up. And I was speaking, and it's also, you know, the problem with experts sometimes is when you're working in the field, like I do, it's not an easy thing, and then to come home at night and then do that as your volunteer activity either. And I don't think it does heritage any good to be completely monolithically heritage. And so I did that for a few years, and was on the verge of burning out. And you can't burn out, so I do other things. But I still do heritage professionally. So.
If I could put a plug in here, the CHO will hold training sessions, and in fact we're holding one on researching heritage buildings in Kincardine in October. We will hold others. Get in contact with us and we will try and set up a workshop in your area if you have enough people, and we'll deal with with the issues that you want to deal with, you know, heritage conservation districts. We've dealt with conversion of churches. So, I mean, it's up to you. We're there to facilitate and help you. And the ministry also holds training sessions for new.
If I could
And
just,
we've got the Heritage Resource.
Yeah, and since we're plugging, the Heritage Resources Center runs courses, or workshops rather, in different parts of the problem. One coming up in Muskoka in August.
I'd like to comment on the question there, because the challenge of finding qualified people to fill volunteer positions is one I'm fairly familiar with, because I've been involved with a number of volunteer organizations, often in the position of finding more volunteers. And in terms of filling a Heritage Committee position, as has already been alluded to, generally an ad goes in the paper. And I think there are a lot of qualified people out there who say, well, I don't think that I'm really qualified, you know. And it takes someone to approach an individual and give them the compliment, really, of saying, I think you would be a great member of the committee. Why don't you apply for that position? And I think we lose a lot of people by not having someone approach them and say, you'd be good, why don't you put your name in there?
Okay, we have an opportunity for 2 more questions from somebody we haven't heard from at the back there. In front of you, Paul, the taller gentleman sitting down there.
Hello. I'm actually one of those people who was approached to be on a Heritage Committee and was essentially groomed by the people already on that committee. So I'd like to definitely echo what everyone was saying on stage in terms of being that actually is effectively how I learned, how I trained. My question is sort of when you're fighting heritage battles and you may be encountering another fellow heritage warrior who's in theory on your side, but it's maybe a little bit difficult to rein in and sort of be unintentionally doing more what everyone else considers to be more harm than good in terms of who they may be talking to and specifically how they may be talking to them and how often they may be talking to them, maybe not telling other people what's going on. And I'm wondering if anyone on the panel has any experience with that and what sort of advice they might be able to offer to others in that, if they find themselves in that situation.
I think you have to be courageous and speak up, because otherwise, you're right, they can do more harm than good. My Heritage Committee was a designated property in an area that we're trying to designate as a heritage area, which in Grimsby Beach, and somebody painted one of the cottages some vibrant colours, and they were adamant that they were going to send a nasty letter to them and saying, you know, please don't, you know, how dare you do that? And, you know, I had to tell them, I said, look, you know, think about it. I mean, maybe we can do it through education, but if we ever go to be doing a heritage district, and you know, this person's going to be out there with this nasty letter waving it to everyone, you know, be careful about that. And well, they still sent the letter, but you know, but anyway. So I think you just be courageous and tell them.
So one, just I guess a story about that is quite often we get asked if we'll do some work for or help local heritage committees. And what I usually say is that yes, we will, but what I'd like to do with them first is have a strategy session about what the committee is actually doing and what they want to do and what their goals are. And that's usually met with a kind of blank stare, like, what do you mean? And I say, well, what's your plan? What are you doing? I'll say, for instance, do you want to have another heritage planner on your staff? Well, yes, but we'll never get that. And I said, well, no, not if you don't put it on your plan. That's something that you want. So what it comes from that, I think, is the group has a strategy about how they're going to approach things, and then you can use that to manage what different people are going to say and who's going to talk to who, and so that it's about planning.
Okay, one more question. Yes, lady at the back.
Thank you. I'm Jenny Rieger, and I'm from a few years back past chair of the National Historic Site Alliance for Ontario. And one thing we haven't mentioned is a really good document that Heritage Community members should have. And when I'm with the NHSA in Ontario, we made a big effort to get that out to all NHSA, or National Historic Site owners. And that's the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic property in Canada. It's a really good introductory document for the kinds of things that we, as people on committees, have to be approving and thinking about. And it's simple to follow. It's got some good guidelines, and we found it really useful from that committee.
Okay, for everybody, this document, Standards and Guidelines for the Conservation of Historic Places in Canada, is available on the Parks Canada website. It's a great document. We use it, as a professional, we use it, and I suggest that your committee should also be aware of it in making decisions on applications regarding heritage properties. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists here.